Jason drifted in the cold expanse of space. The stars flickered around him like distant beacons. His ship was dead. The console in front of him was a mess of static and broken wires. The controls unresponsive. He was lost, stranded, with no way back to Earth. The last thing he remembered was the ship shaking violently as a strange energy wave hit it. Then everything went dark. His only hope was the faint signal he picked up on his scanner. An unknown planet in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was all he had, so he set his course for it, whatever it was he needed to survive. The descent was rough. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. Smoke poured from the vents, and alarms blared in his ears. The craft wasn't built for landing. This wasn't supposed to be a crash landing. It wasn't supposed to be like this. As the ground rushed up to meet him, Jason braced for impact. He wasn't sure if he was going to survive, but there was nothing else he could do. He closed his eyes for a brief moment as everything spun out of control. Then the world went black. When Jason awoke, he was lying on the ground, staring up at a sky he had never seen before. It was too blue, almost too vibrant, like it wasn't quite real. His head throbbed, and he groaned, pushing himself up onto his elbows. The crash had left him disoriented, but he forced himself to stand. His ship was a wreck, scattered across a small valley. The terrain was unfamiliar, rocky, with strange plants growing in clusters around him, and the air was thick with an earthy scent, almost sweet. He stumbled forward, trying to find any sign of civilization, hoping for some kind of help. The strange landscape stretched out in front of him, endless and mysterious. It didn't take long for him to realize he wasn't alone. Something moved in the distance. Tall shapes flickered between the trees. He stopped and crouched low, trying to make himself invisible, but his heart pounded in his chest. His eyes scanned the environment as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Were they animals or something more advanced? The shapes grew closer, and Jason held his breath. A shadow shifted in the corner of his vision, and then the figures emerged from the trees, towering above him, their forms unlike anything he'd ever seen. Tall and insectoid, with chitinous armor and glowing eyes, they moved in eerie unison like a swarm, but there was something intelligent about them, something purposeful. Jason couldn't move a muscle, his body frozen in a mix of fear and curiosity. The leader of the group, a larger figure, stepped forward, its eyes locking onto him. It tilted its head, as if studying him, its movements slow, deliberate. The others stood back, waiting, their breath steady, as the Queen spoke in a voice that was smooth and clear, though tinged with an alien undertone. She didn't speak with hostility, but with calm confidence, almost as if she were expecting him. She gestured for him to follow her, and Jason couldn't bring himself to do anything else. He felt as though something was pulling him toward her, something compelling and magnetic. Without a word, he walked toward the Queen, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. He had no idea what was happening, why he had crashed here, or why they had found him, but deep down he knew that his life had just taken a turn that would change everything. Jason followed the Queen through the alien landscape. The ground beneath his feet felt soft and uneven as he walked behind her. Her form towered over him, her movements fluid and graceful. Despite her size, she moved with an air of authority. The others remained behind, at a distance, watching, but never intervening. Their silent presence unnerved him. He kept his eyes on the Queen. Her face was regal, her features sharp and angular. Her eyes glowed a soft amber hue that seemed to pierce through the air itself. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that she was sizing him up, weighing something within him, but what he couldn't fathom. The journey felt longer than it should have as they made their way through the dense forest. The trees were unlike any he had seen before, towering and twisting into shapes that defied logic. Their leaves shimmered with an iridescent glow, casting an eerie light over the landscape. Everything seemed so alien, but at the same time strangely beautiful. Jason couldn't help but feel like an outsider, like a small speck in a vast and unfamiliar world. Yet the Queen's presence was somehow reassuring, like she was guiding him towards something he didn't fully understand. They arrived at what appeared to be a large structure. It was made of organic material like the trees and plants around it, but shaped with purpose. It resembled a massive hive or nest woven together with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with life. The Queen gestured for him to enter, and Jason hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The air inside was cool and thick with the scent of flowers and fresh earth. The walls seemed to hum with a low resonance, as if the entire place was alive. Inside was unlike anything Jason had ever seen, a mix of organic technology and living spaces. The floor beneath him was soft yet firm, with a strange glowing texture. The walls curved and flowed like they were made from living tissue, yet they pulsed with light in rhythmic patterns, as though the structure itself was breathing. Jason's heart raced with the realization that he was standing inside something far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built, and it was all alive. The atmosphere felt alive. The Queen led him deeper into the structure, her eyes never leaving him. She stopped in the center of a vast chamber. The ceiling above them was high and vaulted. A soft glow emanated from the walls, casting the entire room in a gentle light. The floor was covered in thick green moss that felt alive under his boots. Jason stood still, unsure of what was expected of him. When she spoke, her voice echoed through the chamber, smooth and melodic. She asked him if he was well, if he needed sustenance or rest. Jason didn't know how to respond. He had never been in a situation like this before. The aliens around him were unlike anything he had encountered. Their forms, strange yet somehow fascinating. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was speechless in the face of the Queen's presence. Her gaze never wavered. She waited for him to speak, and then she did something unexpected. She smiled, not in a mocking way, but in a gentle, welcoming manner, the kind of smile that made him feel as though he belonged despite everything, despite being so far from home. With a slow movement, she gestured to a seat beside her and invited him to sit. The others stood at a distance, their eyes on him, but there was no malice in their gaze, just curiosity. He finally found his voice and asked the question that had been gnawing at him since he first saw her. Why had she brought him here? What did she want with him? Her smile faded just slightly before she spoke, her voice calm yet laced with something deeper. There was something in her words that made him shiver. She welcomed him not just as an outsider, but as a potential solution to something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The Queen sat across from Jason, her eyes fixed on him with a knowing intensity. She wasn't just looking at him, but through him, as if she were searching for something deep within his soul. Jason shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, trying to piece together the fragments of his situation. But no answers came, only more questions. He had no idea who these aliens were or why they seemed so interested in him. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't leave without finding out. The Queen finally spoke, her voice low and steady with a sense of gravity that made Jason feel as though the entire world had paused in that moment. She told him that her people had been watching humans for centuries. Their ships had crossed paths with human explorers in the past, but they had never made contact, never revealed themselves to the people of Earth. Jason was stunned. Why now? Why had they chosen him to reveal themselves to, and why had they welcomed him to their planet? She continued, explaining that her species had once been a powerful force in the galaxy. They were ancient and wise. Their civilization had flourished for eons, mastering technologies beyond comprehension. But over time, something had gone wrong. Their society had slowly decayed, not from war or invasion, but from within, from a fundamental flaw. They had lost the ability to connect with each other. On an emotional level, the bonds that had once held them together had frayed until they were nothing but hollow echoes of what they once were. Their technology could no longer save them, and they were on the brink of extinction. Jason listened intently as the Queen told him that her people had become disconnected from the very essence of life itself. Their minds had become cold and mechanical, devoid of the warmth that made them truly alive. They could no longer empathize with one another or with any other species. They had evolved into something far removed from the beings they had once been, and now they faced the consequences of their emotional void. They were dying, and there was nothing left to stop it. It was then that Jason realized the weight of what the Queen was asking of him. She had not brought him here by accident. She had not welcomed him simply because he was a lost traveler. She had brought him here because she believed that humanity held the key to saving her people. She believed that humans had something her species had lost, the very thing that made them who they were: compassion, empathy, love. Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. He was just one man. What could he possibly do for an entire species? But the Queen's words lingered in his mind. She was desperate, and she believed in him. She spoke of her people's desperation, their need for a leader, someone to show them the way back to the warmth they had lost, someone who could teach them what it meant to truly care for one another, to build bridges between hearts and minds. Jason realized that the task she was asking of him was nothing short of monumental, yet, as the weight of her request settled over him, he also felt a strange sense of purpose rising within him. He had always known that humanity was capable of great things, but he had never imagined that the greatest gift he could offer might be the very thing his species had taken for granted: the ability to feel, to love, to connect with others on a deep and meaningful level. The Queen's eyes never left him as she waited for his response, her patience almost infinite, as if she had known all along that he would be the one to understand the gravity of her words. Jason knew in that moment that his life would never be the same, and no matter what happened next, he could not turn back. The path had already been set before him, and he had no choice but to walk it. Jason stood in the quiet chamber of the Queen's dwelling, the weight of her words still echoing in his mind. It felt surreal. This was more than a simple rescue mission, more than a way to find his way home. This was something far deeper and more complex than anything he could have imagined. The Queen's people were dying not from war or disease, but from an emptiness that had consumed their souls. They had lost their connection to each other and to the world around them, and now they were slowly fading away into oblivion. The Queen stood beside him, her eyes never leaving him, as she spoke of her people's struggle, how their once thriving civilization had been brought to its knees by the absence of compassion and empathy. She explained that their species had once been bound together by a deep emotional connection, but over time they had evolved into beings of pure logic and reason. Their society became dominated by technology and efficiency, but in their quest for progress they had lost something essential, something that made them truly alive, and now they were paying the price. Jason's mind raced as he tried to process everything he had learned about these beings. Their entire way of life was built around cold efficiency and technological prowess, but they had lost the ability to feel. The bonds that connected them had frayed until they were nothing but hollow shells of what they once were. He wondered how long it had been like this, how long they had been drifting without hope, without warmth, and without love. It was a frightening thought that struck him at his core. Could humanity ever become like them? The Queen's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked at her again. She spoke of her people's desperate need to rediscover what they had lost. She told him that they had tried everything to restore their emotional connection, but nothing had worked. Their advanced technology had failed to fix the fundamental problem. They could no longer feel the things that made them human. They had become like machines bound by logic and reason, with no heart, no soul, no true sense of purpose. She told him that she believed the key to saving them lay in humanity's unique ability to connect with one another in a way that transcended logic and reason, that humans had a power within them to build bridges between hearts and minds, to heal wounds that had long festered, to bring warmth to the coldest of souls, and it was this power that she needed Jason to help them rediscover. Jason felt a deep sense of responsibility welling up inside him. He had always known that humanity was capable of great things, but this was something he had never imagined. He had been thrust into a role that felt almost too great for him to bear. He was just one man. How could he possibly help an entire species reconnect with something so intangible as empathy and love? How could he teach them something they had long forgotten? But as he looked into the Queen's eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope, a deep yearning for something she could not reach on her own. She wasn't asking him to save her people with weapons or technology, but with something far more powerful, with a gift that humanity had long taken for granted: the ability to care for one another, to truly understand and feel the struggles of others. It was a gift that humans often overlooked, but to the Queen and her people it was the key to their salvation. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the enormity of what he was being asked to do. He wasn't just here by accident. He wasn't just a lost traveler. He was the chosen one, the one who could bring back the warmth and connection that had been lost in this alien world. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. He didn't know if he was ready for the task ahead, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't walk away now. He had to try. Jason spent the following days in a whirlwind of activity. The Queen's people had already begun to change since he arrived. He could feel it in the air. The subtle shifts in their behavior, their once rigid and cold interactions, were slowly softening. They were learning to listen to each other, to communicate not just with words, but with their gestures, their expressions, their presence. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, a connection that had not been there before. At first, Jason wasn't sure how to approach them, how to begin teaching them something as abstract as empathy. After all, he wasn't a teacher, he was just a man thrown into an impossible situation. But as he spent more time with the Queen and her people, he began to realize that the answer was simple. It wasn't about giving them a lesson or presenting them with theories. It was about showing them the power of human connection in its purest form. It was about sharing stories. It was about kindness. It was about the little moments that made life worth living. He began by speaking with them about his own life, about the relationships he had with friends and family back on Earth, how they had shaped him and made him who he was. He talked about the times when he had struggled and how the support of those around him had helped him get through it. He explained how the human experience was filled with joy and pain, and how both were essential to understanding the world and the people around them. As he spoke, the Queen watched him closely, her eyes reflecting a curiosity that went beyond mere interest. She was absorbing every word, every lesson he imparted. She asked him questions not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to understand how humanity could feel so deeply, how humans could form such strong bonds despite all the obstacles they faced. The other members of the Queen's species began to listen too at first. They were hesitant. They didn't understand why Jason would talk about love and grief and sacrifice in such an open way. But as the days went on, they began to open up themselves. They started sharing their own experiences, their own stories about what had once connected them and what had been lost. They spoke in fragmented sentences, at first unsure of how to express themselves without the cold efficiency they had been raised on. But as they spoke, they started to feel something shift within them, something that had been dormant for so long. Jason was amazed at how quickly they began to change. Their once stoic faces now showed subtle signs of emotion. Their eyes softened when they listened to one another. They began to reach out to one another in small ways, a hand placed on a shoulder, a shared look of understanding. These were the first signs of true connection between them, the first signs of a society that was beginning to rebuild itself from the inside out. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the way they interacted with each other, the small acts of kindness that started to surface in their daily lives. Jason noticed it in the way the Queen would pause to listen to one of her subjects, the way they would help each other without being asked, the way they began to smile more often. But even with these small victories, Jason knew the path ahead was far from easy. There were still many obstacles to overcome. These beings had been disconnected for so long that undoing the damage would take time and effort. But for the first time since he had arrived on this strange planet, Jason felt a spark of hope. He could see it now, the potential for a brighter future for the Queen's people, for a society built on compassion and empathy, something that they had lost, but now had the chance to reclaim. And it was all thanks to the one thing humans had always taken for granted, the ability to care for one another. As the days passed, Jason could see the transformation in the Queen's people. It wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Small shifts had grown into something more tangible. The Queen herself had begun to change. Her once cold demeanor softened when she spoke to her subjects. She became more patient, more understanding. With every lesson Jason shared, she seemed to grow more connected to the people around her, and more connected to herself. The walls that had separated her from her people started to crumble bit by bit. Jason felt a strange sense of pride as he watched this unfolding, but it was also accompanied by an unsettling feeling. The more the Queen and her people changed, the more he began to realize the deeper cost of their transformation. As the emotional warmth began to fill the alien world, Jason found himself becoming deeply affected too. He had come here to teach them, to help them rediscover empathy. But what he hadn't expected was how much their change would touch him, how much he would begin to care for them. The way they began to care for each other, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much deeper, something that made him feel as though his heart was being pulled in two directions. The Queen began to rely on him more and more, not just for guidance, but for companionship. She sought his counsel when her people struggled with difficult emotions, When they faced moments of doubt or fear, she would ask him what humans would do in those situations. How would they cope? How would they heal? And every time, Jason found himself searching for answers, too unsure of how much of humanity's resilience he could offer. And yet he knew deep down that his presence was becoming a lifeline to her people, but also to the Queen herself. There were moments when Jason found himself questioning everything he had come to know about humanity. His own emotions felt more intense in this alien world, where warmth and connection had once been non-existent. The very act of empathizing with the Queen and her people began to weigh on him more than he could have imagined. The longer he stayed, the more he became entwined with their struggles. He could no longer see himself as an outsider, a traveler passing through. He had become part of their world, part of their struggle, and part of their future. The price of empathy wasn't just in the effort it took to teach these beings how to feel, it was in the emotional toll it took on him too. Jason found himself becoming increasingly torn between two worlds, the one he had left behind on Earth, and the one he was now building with the Queen's people. His bond with them grew stronger with each passing day, and yet the more he cared for them, the more it became clear that he could never truly belong here, no matter how much he helped, no matter how deeply he became embedded in their society. The Queen seemed to sense his internal struggle. She approached him one evening after a long day of lessons. Her voice was soft, but filled with concern. Jason had been avoiding her for hours, trying to process his feelings, but she wasn't going to let him keep his distance. She needed to understand what was happening within him. She asked him what he was afraid of, what was holding him back from fully embracing the change he had helped bring about. She asked him why he was struggling to see the beauty in what was happening before his eyes. Jason stared at her for a long moment, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He wanted to be the one to guide them, to help them heal, but the cost was too great. He felt himself unraveling the deeper he went into their world. He couldn't help but wonder if he was losing himself in the process, if the very thing he was teaching them was slowly consuming him too. The Queen's eyes softened as she listened to him. Her understanding of human emotions had grown in ways that Jason hadn't anticipated. She knew this wasn't easy for him, and she knew the burden he was carrying. She told him that their transformation wasn't just his responsibility, it was theirs too. They had to learn to navigate their own emotional landscapes. They had to find their own way back to themselves. But even as she said this, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking a fine line between healing and losing themselves completely. The deeper they went into empathy, the more they risked becoming overwhelmed by it all. And Jason wasn't sure how much more of this he could endure. The days stretched into weeks, and Jason found himself standing at the crossroads of his own heart. The Queen's people were changing in ways that made him proud yet fearful. They were becoming more human in their emotions, but at the same time he began to sense a delicate balance within them, a balance that could easily tip into chaos if they lost control of their newfound feelings. Jason had given them the tools to connect, but the deeper they went into those connections, the more vulnerable they became to the intensity of emotions that humans took for granted, emotions they had never learned to manage. One evening, as the sky above the alien world shifted into a rich shade of purple, the Queen called for him once again. She wanted to speak with him about what was happening to her people. She had seen the signs of growth in them, but also the signs of strain. Their society was beginning to feel the weight of their emotional awakening. Their once orderly and efficient existence was now plagued by confusion and unpredictability. The Queen had learned much from Jason, but there were things she couldn't yet grasp, things that had to come from within her people themselves. She asked him if he thought they were ready to face the complexities of what it meant to feel, to love, to care. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she needed to know if they had the strength to move forward, or if they were doomed to repeat the same mistakes they had made centuries ago. Jason looked at her, unsure of how to answer. He had always believed in humanity's resilience, but here among the Queen's people he wasn't so sure anymore. He had watched them struggle with emotions they didn't understand, and seen them stumble in their attempts to rebuild the connections they had lost. Jason knew that their journey had only just begun. The Queen had already proven to him that her people were capable of change, but that didn't mean they would always be able to control the flood of emotions that came with it. There was so much more for them to learn about themselves, and about the delicate balance between love and pain, between joy and sorrow, between light and dark. The Queen's gaze was steady as she waited for him to respond. She didn't expect him to have all the answers, but she needed him to be honest with her. Jason took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He had always been a problem solver, always thinking about the next step. But now he wasn't sure what the next step was. He wasn't sure if there was a clear path forward. All he knew was that he couldn't leave them now, not after everything they had been through, not after everything they had begun to build together. He finally spoke, his voice quiet and filled with uncertainty. He told the Queen that he didn't have all the answers, that he didn't know if they were ready to fully embrace the emotional journey they had started, but he knew they had to try. There was no going back now. The healing was underway, and even though it might be painful and unpredictable, it was the only way forward. They couldn't live in a world of cold efficiency and logic forever. They needed to feel and to connect and to rebuild the bonds that had once held them together. The Queen nodded slowly, her expression softening. She had always known this was a risky path, but she had trusted Jason and his humanity to help guide them through the unknown. She understood now that their healing wasn't just about regaining what they had lost. It was about learning to live with the uncertainty and the vulnerability that came with being alive, with being human. Jason's heart settled for the first time in weeks. He wasn't sure where this path would lead or what the future would hold for him or for the Queen's people, but one thing was certain: they had begun something beautiful together, and whatever happened next, he knew that they would face it with open hearts and minds, ready to embrace the complexities of life and the warmth of connection.